Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And this month, Densoro has chosen something they're calling promotional dissonance. Densoro says, "Happy August, maybe I'll stop boiling alive soon. I wanted to talk about something I've been calling promotional dissonance. In my parlay about Limbus Company's intriguing theme song, you brought up the League of Legends music videos and lamented how their quick, snappy, decisive combat mirrors the experience of actually playing the power game grindfest that is League of Legends. Yes, League of Legends is a good example because it has very abstract gameplay. There's really no way to relate in real time to why last hitting a minion would be the thing that would decide a conflict. And so to be fair, I'm not sure you really could depict League of Legends in a cinematic trailer that would be like the gameplay of League of Legends. But indeed, that creates some promotional dissonance. Sometimes I push back against like these terms, but the only problem is if they're not defined. Great temporary term to use, the gap between what a game's trailer depicts and the actual experience of playing the game. Cool. Densoro continues, as a broke-ass cheapskate connoisseur of video game trailers, Densoro says, I run into this a lot. The trailer primes me for one experience and the game delivers a completely incongruous, consequently disappointing experience. So, what? Why? Stop. Video games, what are you doing? Let's briefly start, because there's a lot spoilered out on this parlay. Let's start by talking about why this is done. Obviously, you might be saying, well, most video games, you just kind of can't represent them visually in a trailer clearly. Yeah, I mean, I would begin this parlay by saying that a trailer essentially never correctly captures or advertises what an experience will be like. I'm tempted to just say that trailers are for suckers and leave it at that. That trailers are too motivated by finance and the algorithms to be considered to be valuable. Trailers commit many crimes. They spoil stories in games and other media alike. They are generally not a representation of even if they show you the gameplay, they're not a representation of the experience of playing the game. In fact, I would argue that just about nothing can do that. You really can't know what the experience of playing a game will be like. That is the job of the reviewer, although most reviewers also don't do that job. They can't play the game for long enough to provide that knowledge. There are definitely a few YouTube channels where the review schedule is appropriate for actually providing, and I would argue, the only useful piece of information, which is what they think the experience of playing the game for like the amount of time you're going to play the game is like. So to some extent, trailers at the very least, I would argue, almost can't achieve those goals. They don't even try. I don't believe. I believe they're just trying to market you a thing. They're just like watching an ad. I have a very low opinion of trailers, if you can't tell. However, I think it's better to approach this by thinking about what trailers could or maybe should do and talk about whether they do that before we move on. So in my notes, I have it looks cool, evokes fantasy. Yeah, one thing they could do is tell you what kind of game this is supposedly trying to be. I think this is a place where marketing can be a bit of a problem. Obviously, if the game is going to sell, it's going to look actiony or exciting, even if that isn't the kind of gameplay fantasy that it's supposed to give you. If it's going to be a game where you plot, you really take your time, take it nice and slow, and this is a thinking man's game, You humans out there that are being advertised to in this genre, because I hate trailers so much, I don't watch them, and I don't know what those trailers are like. But they might be very action looking, even though that really isn't the fantasy, I'd argue, that the game evokes. The game isn't trying to be a fast-paced experience, a frenetic experience. But do you see what I mean when I say that a gameplay trailer could evoke those things, perhaps should evoke those things? That would be something helpful gameplay trailers could do, they just often don't. But they at least in theory would be good at that if if that was something they focused on doing. And indeed, I think that for example, I haven't played this game, but Battlefield 2042, that trailer is a very clear statement about what that game is trying to be good at. You know, besides making money, which is the only thing that game actually exists for. But it's not hard to understand what is supposed to be fun about the game when you watch the trailer, right? It's you know, a shooter, and it's got this sandbox where mayhem can occur. I have not played the Battlefield games. I've watched a bit of them, but watching that trailer, I felt like I thought, "Oh, okay, yeah, like no word on how good that experience is at delivering that fantasy, but I'm not confused about why you would want to play this game." In contrast, there are some games where I think many people, even currently playing the game, don't really have a clear idea of what the game is good at delivering a fantasy about. I was teaching someone Magic the Gathering recently, and after a few matches, this extremely bright, beloved person of mine said, "Oh, it's just poker." And I said, "Yep, you got it." And I don't think there's really a way to capture that in a trailer as per se. I feel like there are some games where the fantasy of the game, from a gameplay perspective, really isn't capturable in a trailer. You know, in Magic the Gathering, you might capture a different, like a lore fantasy. You're a wizard, a planeswalker, summoning creatures to fight for you from places you've been, drawing energy from the land. Like that's what the fantasy of the game is. But when I say the fantasy, in this case, I mean like the I guess power fantasy, like what kind of fulfillment, maybe I should say. Again, I used the word tempo earlier, like what pace is the game going to take place at. Another type of thing that trailers could probably do pretty easily, maybe sometimes do, Dead Cells has some animated trailers that got popular recently that do this pretty well. Well, in Dead Cells, you're a mass of undead cells, I guess, and you repeatedly die and come back to life, throwing yourself at the challenges ahead of you, dying, doing it again, dying, doing it again. That's what the gameplay experience will be like. That's part of the, again, sort of the that type of fantasy, a gameplay type of fantasy that the game delivers, and the trailer does focus on that loop. I feel like you know that it's going to be a game where that happens when you see that trailer. Because that is a relatively established model for a game, format for a game nowadays, I do not feel that it is useful to call that type of game a genre personally, but a format people may be familiar with. A lot of people hopefully won't see it as a narrative device. It's like from a flavor perspective, in the game lore, you are dying and coming back to life. You're not returning to a save point. You are canonically dying and coming back to life. It's not like in some other games where you will die a lot, maybe when fighting a Legend of Zelda boss, but canonically you don't. Like it's just a game over, you know? Maybe that's not so clear. But you get the point. There are definitely some things that trailers could do a good job of displaying. I don't think a lot of them do, but it's not like they don't try at all or have nothing to do with the game they're about a lot of the time. It's really only a game like maybe League of Legends is still a good example, where the gameplay is such that trailers, I'm not even sure how you would explain what you were showing the audience if you tried to make a trailer that was League of Legends, you know? And a more cynical person might comment that if you made a trailer that was actually League of Legends gameplay, people wouldn't think that game was fun to play because it isn't. That's my personal opinion. You like what you like. But it's interesting, isn't it? If that thing is meant to be really fun, well, why it doesn't look fun from the outside? Why don't they just show the gameplay if it's fun? And there's quite a few different ways you can answer that. I'm not trying to say that that proves League of Legends isn't fun. That's just an opinion. I'm poking a bit of fun, but I do think it's a really good example, right? League of Legends is really popular. Many people at least think that it's very fun, at least have Stockholm syndrome and are really enjoying it. They probably like it. Like, I'm just being a jerk. You can enjoy League of Legends. I just don't. But why? What's going on? And why is it that even though it's a thing, we're going to assume those people are just enjoying, okay, just let people like that thing. We're going to assume they're not wrong somehow, unbeknownst to them and us, that they like that thing. They probably do. what do they like about it that isn't capturable in a trailer? Because surely, if what they like about the game is something that they are really enjoying it, then if they saw footage of the game, what would be the problem? You see what I'm trying to say? Like, what's the need to cover that up that way? We've established that it does accomplish a few things. It gives you the idea of the fantasy of all these heroes fighting against each other. It's a more abstract ad for the game. It's not meant to evoke the game's gameplay. It's meant to give you an idea of this big roster of characters that's going to be part of it. Showing the gameplay wouldn't tell you that. It wouldn't show you that there's like hundreds of characters and it's this big battle royale of heroes. Now, I'm not sure. Now, maybe the gameplay does. Maybe it would seem like that to some people. But anyway, you get what I mean. The idea that it's a fighting institution, what exactly the League of Legends is a little. I don't want to get into the lore of that right now. I already had enough of that in my life. But you get the point. That there's definitely something the trailer is maybe targeting, trying to accomplish, that isn't just obfuscation. It is maybe they have a different goal. But again, like, but why isn't the goal to show the players the thing that supposedly is fun, that they will have fun if they do? Wouldn't that be very effective? If it's so fun, a lot of games proudly clarified that their trailer is made in engine, like they're showing you gameplay that is kind of like what the world looks like. That is maybe orchestrated, but that is how the game looks. And so, maybe not every format of gameplay would fit that way, but why not do that? Like, what's going on there? I don't know. It's interesting. So let's reveal the spoilered part, because there's more to talk about this subject. Yeah, we can scratch the surface and say trailers are, we live in a society, but Densoro continues, I believe that narrative and filmmaking language used in these trailers is so effective because it draws on imagery and stakes that we can understand intuitively, like don't get hit with weapons, and the games discard this for something more convoluted, losing their punch. To reference our earlier chat about Harrow in Warframe, the promise of tangible combat is often replaced with combat that feels administrative. That's interesting. So the idea is that a lot of game mechanics are more abstract in a way that it would be very difficult to narratively represent. This is kind of like what I described with when I was talking about last hitting minions in League of Legends. If you're not familiar with League of Legends gameplay, good for you. Well done. There are dozens of us. I mean, I have played way too much League of Legends. But to briefly explain, in League of Legends, you are sort of pushing from one base to another. And part of that process is leveling up and getting better items so you're more powerful. So you can destroy the defensive towers along the way to the enemy base and then destroy that final thing. And those lanes full of towers, the pathways to the enemy base, the primary ones anyway, are protected by a stream of minions, little soldiers. And if you get the last hit on one and then it dies because you did that damage to it, you get money. No other damage contributes money to that minion's death. You have to get the last hit specifically. So last hitting, or creep score, because they were called creeps in the original Dota, is a primary method by which you compete in League of Legends. Because it's what gives you experience and gold, to a great extent, the game is won and lost based on how well you last hit. This just wouldn't really make sense from a intuitive narrative storytelling perspective. I agree, Densoro. There really isn't an easy way to depict that. Likewise, there are types of power fantasy or just narrative idea that it is more difficult to represent in gameplay. So, for example, Harrow in Warframe is, sort of about the sacrament of, blessing or presiding over the proceedings of your squad, murdering everything. And that does lead to abilities that don't actually directly do much to your enemies. Penance, you flagellate yourself to lose your shields and get some combat bonuses. This doesn't really directly affect the enemies. You're just going to use those buffs to kill them. This is definitely a Warframe where if you showed a trailer and it depicted Harrow's abilities, a lot of these things are not things that that are easy to understand narratively, like without any explanation over a 30-second, clip or whatever, or a 1 or 2 minute trailer. It might be a little difficult to understand that Harrow is, from a gameplay perspective, making a sacrifice to get a benefit. Cool. But from a narrative perspective, why is this character hitting themselves? And then they're more powerful? Is that what happened? It's some kind of blood magic or something. It's at least a little bit more vague. There are definitely those mechanics that are harder to represent. Cool, cool. Densoro continues, when I express the desire to play a game implied by the trailer, people often tell me that that would be impossible because there could not be a game if combat was as nuanced or as over quickly as the stakes of the trailer suggest. Ooh, that's not true. That's wrong. That's who said that? That person doesn't know what they're talking about. That's not true. Let's read it again. When I, Densoro, express the desire to play the game implied by the trailer, when there's this promotional dissonance, people often tell you that it would be impossible because there couldn't be a game if combat was as nuanced or over as quickly as the stakes of the trailer suggest. There are many games that are like that. I'm clicking the next spoiler. Oh, Densor says, this seems weird to me as we watch the success of quick and brutal games like Ghost Runner or Post Void, or deep martial arts games like Absolver, Sifu, or For Honor. Yeah, like there literally just are games that do that. That is objectively incorrect. Like, I don't know who said that to you, but they're literally just wrong. Like there are games that do that thing. All right, so, but I think the interesting thing is how the game's mechanics and the game's narrative clash. And then if you want to tell the story of the game at a glance, it then becomes a little challenging to, finagle that. I think of this a lot as getting more and more important in the video game industry because of the prominence of gameplay clips, trailers, previews. If you watched the I forget what they actually called it, but the E3 thing, the Jeff Keighley, that's his name, right? That thing, you know what I'm talking about. The Game Awards guy did like a basically E3 thing. If you watch that, my condolences. But what you saw is some of this effect. Games have, I believe, begun to bias much more heavily for a premise that is marketable, for something that either isn't contrived or is kind of quippy or memey as a preference, as a premise, excuse me, because they prefer that because it's more marketable. And I think that is related to this effect. It makes this problem go away to some extent. They don't have to worry as much about the promotional dissonance because the game was made to be promoted. They designed the game because they won't have promotional dissonance. There was a lot of I hate to say this because independently developed games are often a bastion for excellence in video gaming, but they do also often follow this model because being able to be promotable is more important for them in some ways. They don't have the same backing sometimes that helps them do that. So having a hook of some kind is meaningful. A distinct art style is pretty common, but just like a central gameplay, quirk. I'm going to finish reading the parlay and then we'll talk more about that. Densora says, I believe that experimental titles like these prove that you can have gameplay and story integration that comes from believable combat flow, capturing the unique mechanics and stakes that make combat in fiction so compelling, if you're willing to discard established genre conventions. Yeah, so I don't agree that it's about going against convention necessarily. I feel like there are game genres that types of game that are relatively less promotionally dissonant inherently than others. And that for something like League of Legends, like that's a certain type of gameplay that is no more or less valid theoretically, but is simply less easy to represent narratively. It would be interesting if you tried to restructure a game like League of Legends so that it was mechanically the same, but promotionally less dissonant. I'll give you a very quick example. Maybe all of the characters are necromancers, and when the minions die and you last hit them, you gain, like, blood, but it's just money. It's the same thing. But when they die and you last hit them, you gain their blood or life essence or souls. Some characters in League of Legends have these mechanics. And then narratively, it might be a bit easier to show gameplay of you slurping up the souls of the enemy minions to try to get stronger before your opponent. Never mind the massive plot hole of like why are they then sending in the minions. But anyway, that might be easier to represent in a trailer. You could show gameplay in the trailer that was closer to what the game actually is while still feeling cinematic. You could include the minions and it would feel more like they had a non-abstract role in the proceedings. Does that make sense? It wouldn't be like coins just fly out of them. You could do that. There are trailers like this, don't get me wrong, but like I do think that would solve something. Now, I think, Densoro, I might be wrong, but it kind of seems to me like you're thinking of this kind of from the opposite direction though. You don't want the trailers to change. You just want the games to be like the trailers. You want it to be that trailers made for traileriness and to be filmmaky and trailer like cinematic. I don't know why that took so long to get out. You want games to be that, just to be that thing. And as you pointed out, like a lot of them just are. There are games that are very like playing a movie, theme park or roller coaster ride games. Sometimes people call them. And then, as you pointed out, there are games with like the very quick time to kill that kind of feels like it narratively makes sense in a trailer. Ghost Runner, Post Void, you said, and deep martial arts games like Absolver, Sifu, For Honor that have the combat nuance. So to me, the question is to dig into what about the other games? Like what are we doing there? You definitely can have both. I really, goodness, somebody really dropped the ball saying, trying to argue to you that you can't have a game that has combat like that. I don't know. Um, and again, I strongly feel that this is also a case where one of my favorite topics in video game industry lingo, the idea that the people who made the trailer for League of Legends don't know that a trailer that showed League of Legends gameplay more directly wouldn't have been successful. They might think they know. They might have data that supports that I don't. They might have market research from like other similar games. They might just have argued some way that like, oh, but it like looks boring. You have to get into it or something, which, maybe, I don't know. I'm sure that they have reasons why they did it that way, but no one knows that is the case. I think that Disco Elysium is an interesting example, a game that is going to be plotting in a way. Disco Elysium isn't a fast-paced game, in my opinion, as per se, not an actiony game, I don't believe. But the people who would want to play it aren't like looking for that thing, I would argue. It's evoking a sort of old and new, certain kind of role-playing game on PC from the early days of computer gaming, and also some newer tropes. For example, I think Disco Elysium's success is not unrelated to Dungeons and Dragons, etc. And when Disco Elysium shows trailers, it often includes a lot of the gameplay. Now, in those trailers, you can see, you should go watch them. It's a good example. You can see how a lot of Disco Elysium's weird imagery, it's doing that thing. You see the dude with the space helmet hanging from the tree. There's one trailer where you see like this disco ball scene in the middle of town square in the dark. These mysteries, and so it's enticing your imagination that way because the game has that. The game has that story that it can pull on. Sure. I would argue that the game is a little like that. I'm not sure. I'm beginning to feel like it's really subjective what playing the game implied by the trailer is. You know, we might have different feelings about that. We might watch a trailer and say, "What do I expect this game will be like?" And then we play it. I avoid video game trailers like the plague for the most part, so I wouldn't know. But the only example I can think of is the Disco Elysium one, where I'm thinking, is it like the trailer? I don't really know. I'm not really sure what I think about that. And that's interesting though. I'm interested in this concept. I don't know what to do about it. It feels like there are a lot of games that do kind of get close. There's no clear problem. I don't really agree at all that it's about discarding established genre conventions. I think that there are just some types of gameplay that are easier to represent narratively, or they rely on imagery that is easy to demonstrate in a trailer. Like it's easy to show what would be weird about this thing. Um, but beyond that, I don't know. I don't feel like. I mean, if you consider Ghost Runner, Post Void, Absolver, Sifu, and For Honor to be departures from current genre trends, I guess I see what you mean. But I don't think that they're any less abnormal. Like Post Void is a very simple game, for example. I guess that's what I'm getting at. It's not like boring or uncleverly wrought game or something. Simple is not a bad thing. Just to say, like, I don't think that's it's that they're discarding genre conventions as much. Like, I guess they are. There's a lot of shooters that are not like this and not very many shooters that are like this, but I don't think that has anything to do with why it's good at representing in a trailer. If we agree that it is, I feel like that's just because I don't know, like watching people hide behind cover maybe isn't as easy to represent. I don't know, like, and so a non-cover based shooter, I don't know, it's like watching the gameplay, you think, wow, you get to really get up there and do stuff. It's not about waiting, which cover based shooters really aren't either, ideally. But anyway, you get the point. And games with cover in them often show you're hiding behind cover and there's a huge amount of gunfire coming at you that won't happen in the actual game, but at least like that is sort of the experience of the game, you know? I don't know. I get what you mean. I just feel like the only reason that it seems like Post Void is that way because it was willing to discard genre conventions is because of the order in which the games happened. Like I feel like there just are game concepts that um that lend themselves better to that. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting hung up on that point. I'll move on from that now. But yeah, I'm thinking about what are some other games where it's difficult or for whatever reason the publisher is unlikely to want to represent the game as like its gameplay, kind of like the League of Legends situation. Again, maybe there are a bunch of League of Legends trailers that show gameplay and I just don't know. But I think that's a good example. I think Disco Elysium is an interesting counterexample. It's not just action, like that game has peculiarities that are convenient for showing in a trailer. But I don't think it was made so it would have those things. Like it's not an example like a lot of let's leave them nameless, but there are a lot of games where there's like a very quippy central premise or the game just looks really weird, and I'm not sure that that was the decision they made because they thought it was the best for the game. They did that because it makes it easy to avoid promotional dissonance. The game was designed kind of backwards. How are we going to promote it, and then what's the game going to be afterward? This is really common in the anime industry too. A lot of shows, you can smell them from far away. You look at the key art for the show, and a lot of the time it's like there's literally nothing except characters on it, and you think, hmm. And then you watch the show, and there's really nothing except those characters in the show. There nothing really happens in the show. It would be very difficult to describe what the plot, if there even is one, there usually isn't. There's a premise to the show, but it doesn't go anywhere, even though the characters do lots of things, just nothing really changes about the status quo in a meaningful way. A very good example of this type of show is Rent a Girlfriend, which I'm using as an example because it's popular. I figure a lot of people have seen it. I have the perhaps misfortune of having seen it. But it's a really good example of this. It doesn't mean the show is just automatically bad all the way through, but it is a show where they very clearly thought this will be very easy to advertise. So we should, they didn't make the show from the ground up, but we should adapt this source material because look how easy it will be to advertise. It won't have promotional dissonance. And then when we cover the show, when we adapt it, we'll just make sure to focus a lot on, put a lot of effort into making like the main four girls look really cute in this case. Another example would be, I think, a lot of mecha shows. Only a certain kind of mecha show, but like having the mecha that can be made into toys and franchised you get what I'm trying to say, like be this iconic thing in the show is really good. There are other shows where the characters are maybe more realistic. And maybe that fits the style of the show. Ideally, that the person who wrote the show had that in mind. Like, we're going to make characters like this. Let's lean into that and take advantage of that aesthetic, make something, with a certain tone that wouldn't be possible if we made these pop art looking characters. But in exchange, it might become a bit more difficult to advertise. And so maybe there'll be some kind of premise. An example of this kind of thing would be, oh no, what was that show called? Erased. Erased has, I think, pretty chill character design, but it's got a very clear central premise. It's got a hook that they can easily tell people to market the show. Again, I'm not trying to say necessarily that the people who wrote those shows or the people who made these games did actually make the game thinking like, oh, that will be a good thing to adapt or whatever. But at the very least, publishers picked up on that game or show and or it became popular because it does have a way to avoid promotional dissonance kind of baked in that doesn't maybe sacrifice that much. The Rent a Girlfriend thing, it's like, okay, this is going to be a fairly shallow show, and so it's fine. Like, we can focus on the characters and like what would happen anyway in this situation, So you're not really losing much. Like, if you wanted to make a show about that, like, I don't know, there's some fun parts of that show, whatever. But I can't say I recommend it. You do you. I'm sure some people are enjoying it. It definitely is delivering what you would expect from the show's aesthetic. It's going to be mostly about these characters. There really isn't a plot, exactly. Like a rom-com or an opera or something. Soap opera, excuse me. Again, nothing necessarily wrong with that. In fact, that has a lot of synergy with the marketing approach that they chose to take. A lot of these are, I think, just that, really like examples of good marketing synergy. A story that is built a certain way, and then they thought about, like, okay, working with what this story has, what would be a good way to avoid promotional dissonance when we, try to sell this to people. Again, I think the catch is just we don't see all the stories that don't have good synergy there, but are still very good stories. If you didn't need them marketed to you, you would enjoy them, but we'll never know about them because they have promotional dissonance, so the publisher did not pick them up. That's where I'm going with that. To close things out, yeah, I think in video games, my perception is that this is just done a lot worse. I think that a lot of people playing video games have very little, I guess, demand for like something that is different. A lot of people very comfortably just buy the thing with the name that they've seen before in a way that I feel like they sort of won't in other media. I think, obviously names and franchises are valuable to people because it's the familiar thing. They feel like that will be something similar, never mind that it's often blatantly, obviously not going to be similar. But I think video games are a special case. Video games often require a little bit of stepping outside your comfort zone at first to get to grips with the game. And that makes people even more interested in going to something familiar, if that's what they're looking for. I think maybe that's why that effect is stronger, and why, in practice, a lot of promotional dissonance doesn't matter, because people are buying a game, they know exactly what it is already. The trailer isn't like the game, but it's also irrelevant because people have played 17 Call of Duty games. They're not all the same, but come on, like, it's not like they don't have any idea what the game is like. Further, I think that nowadays it's probably very common for people to watch a video after the trailer that is more gameplay and practice focused. There are videos, Call of Duty, for example, where the developers explain at least what they think or what they want to market to you about the game's gameplay and the decisions they made in the gameplay. So that does give you a very biased, but definitely more direct look at what the gameplay is like. A line I remember very keenly was in some Call of Duty trailer talking about time to kill and how they were saying they thought it was sort of low, but in the footage you're seeing characters shooting each other, and they're not dying very quickly. So I'm not sure what to say. Like, if they think that's low, or they want to get it in your head that that's a low time to kill, which is supposedly good or whatever, they have some goal there. But like, you do at least get to see, hopefully this is not edited game code footage where the time to kill is different than it is on the live servers, but maybe it is. I wonder how much promotional dissonance is remedied by showing follow-up footage of the actual game. That's what I was getting at. You know, on Steam, when you look at a game, you often get a variety of options. You get like the trailer, if there is one, usually with some amount of promotional dissonance, but then there usually is gameplay, or at least pictures of gameplay provided alongside it. So that's kind of what I mean. I feel like trailers nowadays, for video games anyway, usually are supplemented, which does, I think, mitigate the promotional dissonance a little bit, or at least make it much more obvious because you see it here and then here, which mitigates the inconvenience, is what I mean. So, a pretty snarky parlay about a lot of things I don't like, but there's nothing wrong with these things. I know I said that, and I feel like it doesn't have any weight because then I snark on them, but like it's fine. Like, I'm not here to make a philosophical argument about whether it is or isn't good to play that game or watch that show. It doesn't matter. Like, I for what it's worth, I'm not personally the biggest fan, but I do think they're really good examples because they're fairly particular. They do really focus on the thing. Um, uh, yeah, and so it's interesting to see how those respond to the marketing, differently from other things. And it's interesting to look at this and see there's a lot of ways things can kind of synergize with their promotional capability. What about when you find the, I think, somewhat uncommon game or property or whatever that doesn't seem to have any particular synergy with promotional dissonance avoidance, what can we think of any? I mean, for a lot of games, it's like the hook of the game or whatever is usually pretty obvious. That's why those games are popular, because that's important to people. I really don't like the name Soulframe for Warframe. Yeah, that's a good example. Maybe we don't have Soulframe yet, but Warframe's developer Digital Extremes made another game, and they've said it's not really going to be very much like Warframe. It's going to be more, well, it's called Soulframe. What does that evoke? Warframe and Dark Souls. So is it like Warframe and Dark Souls? Where they kind of said it's like Dark Souls, and by that they mean slow, methodical, melee-focused, dodge roll-focused combat. I hate it when people say it's the Dark Souls of Blood. Like, just explain what you mean by that. It's not hard. Anyway. And then Frame. So it's like Warframe? No, it's made by those people because people know Warframe and not Digital Extremes. But that's not entirely clear, right? That would lead you to believe it's kind of a. They even maybe even said, was this a quote from them or just an article I read? I'm sorry, I don't know for sure, that it's a sister game to Warframe. So bad. Like, that's extremely misleading. I'm sure very profitable, but a lot of people will misguidedly try Soulframe, thinking that it will deliver the things they liked about Warframe, because people don't want to step outside their comfort zone so much for their leisure time. They want to enjoy a game that's similar to something they've enjoyed before, but this game literally isn't that. They said, anyway, that it isn't going to be designed to be that thing. So that's very unhelpful. That would be like, of course, if they made, a Call of Duty game that was League of Legends, a lot of people would say, well, what the hell? You're kind of taking the piss out of that term. You knew how we'd react for money, right? But they do this, they just don't do it as much, when they change the settings of the game, I guess, to make people not get as tired of it because they've been playing the same thing over and over again. I don't know. I consider this to be kind of a lose-lose, where the player wants something that actually doesn't make them happier than they would be if they just were a little more patient, tried something a bit new, and the publisher has arguably no choice but to just find a way to make something the same and new at the same time and also lie about it. And it's like I'm not blaming them for that. I've been blaming them for that this entire video, but it's bad. I mean, this is my frustration with mainstream gaming, is that the games are often good in some way. They're often polished, at least. They're on a big stage, but they're not trying to be good. Like, they're trying to wiggle around this nightmare of human psychology. And so I find this topic really interesting, but personally, if I were to replace that discard established genre convention thing, I would really say it's basically just slightly less mainstream games, like slightly less overly marketed AAA games, because I think this really comes from a sort of Ouroboros of marketing that occurs. And when you don't have that, usually there isn't as much, if any, of a problem with just showing the player the gameplay or making a trailer that synergizes with whatever there is in the game that is good for promotion. So that's what I think. Really interesting topic that I had a lot of fun with. As you can see, I woke up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to tear into video game marketing trends. So I hope this was an interesting approach to Densoro. Thank you for the question.